Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension Service here in Hernando County. And welcome to this evening's dinner and a class. This is something we're going to be doing once a month. We're hoping to be able to do it once a month. So be sure to follow us on Facebook, sign up for our monthly newsletter. We're going to tell you at the end about exactly how to follow all of our upcoming classes. But I want to introduce very quickly our special guest for this evening. Sydney is one of our brand new master gardeners, and I'll let her tell you all about herself and her education and experience. One thing I want to mention is if you're watching us either on Facebook or YouTube right now, right below the live feed, you can type in where you type in comments. Feel free to type in your questions, and we'll go ahead and go through all those questions at the very end. So we're going to give Sydney a chance to go through her presentation. And like I said, at the very end, we'll go through all the comments and all the questions and go ahead and get to all of them then. And I see we got a couple on here already. So a couple of Sydney's friends are on here watching, I think. So please feel free to post all your questions. And at the very end, Sydney's going to have her contact information. So if you think up further questions, you'll be able to get in touch with her. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Sydney. If you want to go ahead and pull up your screen sharing there, we'll make sure that works okay.
All right.
And I can see it.
Okay, awesome. Then I will start.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and check out for a little bit, and I'll go ahead and monitor the chat.
Okay, sounds great. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to share this class with you. So, a little bit about myself. Like Dr. Lester said, I'm a brand new Florida Master Gardener volunteer for the UF IFAS extension at Hernando County. And recently, I graduated from New College of Florida last year with my bachelor's in agroecology and environmental studies. And during my time at New College, I worked with our on-site food forest or forest garden, and I also did my undergraduate thesis on Florida forest gardens and their resilience to climate change. And so this class is right up my interests, and I'm really excited to be sharing this topic with you. And so I kind of want to start off with some learning objectives so you know what we're going to be talking about right off the bat. So today I'm going to talk to you about what a forest garden is, kind of some basic concepts, some categories of plants to consider when you're building your forest garden, and then show you some examples just in case you've never seen one before or you've only seen a few. They come in a bunch of different, sizes and arrangements and everything. I also want to talk to you about the benefits of a forest garden so you can kind of gauge, what you want to get from your garden. And then also how you can cultivate a forest garden. So it'll be very broad. It'll be questions to ask yourself to start the planning process. And then also some tips I have to success coming from my experience. And so I wanted to start out with defining some terms because as you either are introduced to this or even if you already are an expert, you might get confused by some of the terms that are used. And through my research, I kind of had to learn what the differences were. And so you might have heard the term food forest before, and the term forest garden might be new to you. And I'm here to tell you that they are essentially the same thing. When you look up the definitions in the literature and everything, they're considered the same thing. But in practice, they can be implemented differently. And I'll explain a little bit in a moment. And so food forests and forest gardens are different from forest farming in that forest gardens and food forests, you were farming like a forest. So you were mimicking forest structure and you were creating a forest. Whereas in forest farming, you were planting in an already forested area. So you would grow crops. It's common in agroforestry that you'd grow like ginseng and mushrooms in already a forested area. So you grow it under the canopy and everything like that. So those are the main differences between the two terms on the top and the two terms on the bottom. Now, the two terms on the top, forest garden and food forest, I underlined it. I underlined the first word of each of the two words. And so forest gardens start with the term forest. And I think that's really important, and it differentiates it from a food forest because the term food forest starts with the word food. And in my research, I found that when people thought of their system as a food forest, they mainly focused on only the food aspect of it. But forests, as you may know, are multi-purpose. You can get a lot from forests. And so using the term forest garden, I found that when I started calling it a forest garden in my research and people started thinking of their system as a forest garden, they saw it a lot differently than they did when they called it a food forest. And so I don't want to confuse you. I'll use those terms interchangeably, and most people will too. But I just wanted to clarify that so you can understand that food forest and forest garden, minor differences, but essentially the same thing. So I'll get into, what is a forest garden after I confused you. So an English horticulturalist, kind of Robert Hart, he kind of coined or created the Western idea of forest gardens. So forest gardens are nothing new. Indigenous cultures that live in forested systems have created forest gardens and things like that. So this is not a new concept, but in the Western part of the world, it is. And so Robert Hart kind of studied forests, and he recognized that they divided themselves into 7 different layers. So he wanted to create a food system that did the same thing because he kind of wanted to do less work and get food from it. And so these 7 layers, I'll go from biggest to smallest essentially. And so using this diagram here, you have the canopy layer. So that's this uppermost tall tree layer. And those are, usually mature trees. They can be native or fruiting. And then you have the low tree layer, which is, kind of the understory. So it's not quite the canopy. And it's not quite, your smaller shrubs. And then you also have the shrub layer here. And so you can see this person for size. The shrub layer is kind of like your berries and your fruiting bushes and stuff like that. And then you have your herbaceous layer. And so these are like your annual and perennial species that are a bit smaller than shrubs. And that's most vegetable gardens that you see. That's usually the herbaceous crops that I'm talking about. And then you have your rhizosphere layer. So that's plants that are grown for their roots and tubers. So this would be like sweet potatoes and ginger and turmeric and things like that. And that kind of differentiates them a little bit from herbaceous plants. And then you have your ground cover layer. So this is really important because you don't want weeds and grass and things that you don't want in your garden. You want everything to be intentional. So this ground cover layers, all this horizontal space, the dark green stuff in between all of the plants, that's an intentional part of your garden. That's called the ground cover layer. And then you have the vertical layer. So you're using all of the space that you have in an area. And that's the vining species. And those can go up trees like shown here. It can be, on your own trellis and things like that. So these are kind of the 7 layers of a forest garden that kind of make it the same as or similar to a natural forest that you'd see in nature. And I kind of wanted to talk about, so you might be thinking, oh my God, I'm a homeowner. That's a lot of things going on. That's too many layers. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be all those 7 layers for it to be considered a forest garden. You can have on the right here, I did a simplified layer or a simplified system. And I simplified the layers down to just kind of the biggest canopy layer, your shrub layer, and then your herbaceous layer, so that you still kind of get the variety, but you're not having to think of all those different layers. But if you have a large property and you're thinking, oh, okay, I can add much more. Sometimes people do add layers. And so there's other layers like you can add beehives for honey or to pollinate your garden, or you can have chickens, for eggs and things like that. So that would be an intentional animal component. All of these systems are going to have animals and insects and things that it attracts, but having an intentional component would make that an extra layer. And then you can also add a mycelial or fungal layer. And so this would be if you're if you want to grow edible mushrooms and things like that, or have intentional fungi in your system. And then maybe you have a body of water, or you want, to do a pond or something like that. That would be kind of an extra layer of like an aquatic or wetland layer. And so, like I said, it comes in all shapes and sizes, and no two forest gardens are ever going to look the same. And it just depends on your area, what you want to do, what you want to get out of it, and so on. So I kind of wanted to go over some categories of plants to consider. Um, you might have heard of annuals and perennials and natives and things like that. And that's the majority of your system. So there's a lot that you can do with Florida natives. We have a lot, and a lot of them are edible. You can use them so oaks, you can use the acorns, you can grind them up and you can create acorn flour. Pines, you can use the needles and other parts of the tree for teas, and some other parts are edible. And so there's a lot that natives can do in your system for you, and then also for the environment. So you're kind of conserving that local biodiversity by incorporating natives into your system. And then you have annuals and perennials. And so the majority of your system is going to be consisted, or is usually consists of perennial species. And that's because this is more of a long-term garden. And so perennials are plants that last more than 1 year or one season. So they're the longer term. Whereas annuals, as in the name, they only last 1 year or one season. So those are your short term, usually most vegetable crops that people grow in their garden to start out are annuals. And then you have pollinator plants. So 90% of flowering plants and a third of human food crops depend on pollinators. And so they're very important. And when I talk about pollinators, I'm talking about bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, birds, and bats. And majority of the time, if you have fruiting species in your garden, you're going to be supporting pollinators. But it's important to think of, how you are supporting pollinators, and if you have enough pollinator plants in your garden and things like that. Some of your crops might need a specific pollinator, not just bees or butterflies or birds. It might need beetles. And so you have to consider that. And then nitrogen fixers. I think these are one of the most important components to consider. Especially, I'm going to talk a little bit later about, kind of supplementing, or why not to use synthetic fertilizers and things like that. So nitrogen fixers are a big factor, because that is an essential nutrient for all plants, but especially crops. If you want to get good crops from your garden, you need nitrogen. And so most nitrogen fixers are in the legume family, which is Fabaceae. And the thing that makes them nitrogen fixers is that they form a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that are in their roots. And so the thing is that nitrogen is not available for most plants in the soil. It's present in the soil, but it needs to be in a fixed form in order for plants to use it. And so the bacteria will fix nitrogen, and so that it's usable by the plant. And then the plant will feed that bacteria carbohydrates and sugars and stuff. And so they both benefit from this relationship. So by having nitrogen fixers in your garden, some nitrogen fixers will add nitrogen to the soil as they grow, and others you have to cut down and mulch them back into your garden in order for them to actually add nitrogen. So it's important to know, the kinds that you have, why you're growing them, and so on. Okay, so I wanted to show you some examples. These are 2 forest gardens that I did research on for a year during my undergraduate thesis. And I kind of wanted to show you all the different varieties that they come in. And I have a few more examples on the next slide. But I mainly wanted to focus on Bay Haven Elementary, which is this one right here. And I wanted to show you that so you might notice that this is in between 2 buildings. It's essentially in an alleyway of this school. So it doesn't get a lot of sun. It's an elementary school, so they have limited amount of help, but they are still able to cultivate this beautiful garden. And they have, you can see bananas here, papayas, they have star fruit, they have everything that they could possibly fit in this area, they did. And they've gotten a lot of food out of it, and they've gotten a lot of education and things like that. And so I wanted to show you that even if you have a small amount of space, or, maybe you don't get a lot of sun or things like that, you can still cultivate a beautiful forest garden They're pretty resilient. And then this is the new College of Florida Forest Garden, which this is the forest garden that I worked with during my undergraduate experience. And it may look really big, but it's not that big. And there's a lot growing here. And this provided food for the campus, and there was a class taught around it. But I kind of want to show you, like, the majority of the species that were grown in both of these were the same, but they look very, very different. And so, like I said, no two forest gardens will be the same, even if they're composed of the exact same plants and the same number. It just all depends. And so I also wanted to show you different forest gardens. So a lot of people, especially homeowners, you do not want something that looks like what I just showed you on the other slide. It might be too messy or too chaotic for you, and that's fine. It's not for students, but as a homeowner, you have to think of those things, or even just in general. It might be your personal preference. So I kind of wanted to show you a few more manicured ones. And so it can be as manicured or as naturalized as you want it to be. And so I wanted to show you, some people, like in this one, they had stairs here, and they kind of made these like beautiful paths. And same in this one down here. It looks like it's a relatively small area. They have a nice path down here. And they also incorporated their grass. They still wanted a bit of their grass in there, and it's nice and manicured. And so these, I kind of wanted to showcase that it's your garden and you can do whatever you need to do with it and still have a beautiful biodiverse garden that gives you food and whatever you want to get from it. And then I also wanted to kind of showcase a larger scale forest garden. And so you can see from the size of this house, this is a large amount of property and they have a lot growing here. And so, big or small, you can do it. And so I just want to kind of show some examples so you can get an idea. And so now I want to talk about the multitude of benefits of cultivating a forest garden for both you and the environment. And so looking at this picture here, I put down all of the benefits that I can think of, but these are not the only ones. So obviously you can get food from it. Most people are growing a forest garden because they want food, and that's awesome. You can also get educational opportunities. You don't have to be a part of a school to get education from this. Maybe you want to learn, maybe you want to teach others in your community, maybe you want to teach your grandchildren or your family. There's a lot of education that can come from a forest garden. And same with, you can grow crops for medicinal use. Some people grow tea gardens and things like that because they want teas and things like that. So you could use it for medicine. You can also build community. Maybe you're thinking of building one in your community as a community, like a public garden, or maybe you're thinking of trying to get you and your family or your friends to get together and build something beautiful. And so you can kind of, a forest garden can kind of create a community, and it can also, help you build one if one doesn't exist. And then you can also join communities, gardening communities and things like that. So it kind of fosters that community naturally. You can also build a business from it. So if you are wanting to grow particular crops and sell them, or, maybe you want to sell the food or things like that, you can get business from it. You can also get some aesthetic from a forest garden. If you place the trees right and you do all the shrubbery and everything like that, it can be very beautiful. And then also, recreation, you can, all the recreation you can think of in a forest, you can get from a forest garden. And same with spiritual and cultural benefits. So there's a lot, in a lot of cultures, there's a rich history of farming the land. And I think you can connect with your culture by cultivating a forest garden and using the ancient ways of farming of your culture. That's a really great way to kind of use what you know and what you want to learn and kind of connect culturally to this system, and then also spiritually. So people connect to forests and natural places a lot spiritually. And so while you're cultivating a forest garden, you can get a lot of spiritual benefits from doing that. And then, you can get, as I said earlier, incorporating native species and things like that, you can conserve local biodiversity, either by growing natives or just by having a bunch of different plants and everything in your yard. You can support the local wildlife. So, maybe you're helping support some native birds or some native lizard populations and things like that. So, in growing a forest garden, you are benefiting the environment directly, because as this other benefit down here, regulation of natural cycles of like nutrients and water. Just by doing that, by growing this forest garden, you are kind of creating a small ecosystem, and in that, you are preserving local biodiversity, which is super important, especially for Florida. And so these two benefits I'm going to go over a little bit more in depth on the next two slides, which I have mitigating climate change locally and globally, and then also food security because of the climate change resilience of these systems. And so when I'm talking about resilience to climate change, I'm talking about I'm not talking about gradual climatic changes, or, when we're gradually getting colder, gradually getting hotter and things like that. That is not what affects a garden, or most plants and things like that. It's these really strong weather events like hurricanes or flooding or things like that that really shock a system. But forest gardens, similar to that of forests, are able to withstand these extreme weather events as a whole system. And so you might lose some plants, but overall the system usually can maintain itself because you have that biodiversity. And with that biodiversity comes varying tolerances. And so what I mean by that is, let's say, we get a hurricane and it floods your whole property. So you might have some plants that don't like wet feet and they will die or they won't do that great. But then you might have some that love water, and so overall that system, and it also having a bunch of species that can suck up a lot more water than just, let's say, grass or a small annual garden. So your system is prepared for these just because it's super biodiverse. And that, with the unpredictable future that we have with climate change and also, living in Florida, we're on the coast, so there's a lot of risk there. Having these systems can create like food security because you're not as worried that, oh, if I get a hurricane, my whole system's going to be gone. And so now mitigating climate change, you might think, oh, being a homeowner or being, one person growing a forest garden isn't going to do that much, but it will. So when I talk about mitigating climate change, I'm only going to talk about one aspect, and that's carbon sequestration. And so I don't want to talk about carbon as if it's a bad thing. Carbon is a building block of life. All living things are made of carbon. But when there's too much of it in the atmosphere, we get the greenhouse effect. And so that is what we're trying to mitigate. And so trees naturally, as they grow, and most plants, but trees especially because they can grow for so many years, as they grow, they're photosynthesizing, that's drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they're storing it in their trunk, their branches, their leaves. I have a little fact right here that 50% of a tree's biomass is carbon, and that is true. And that is because as they grow, they were storing that carbon in all of their plant parts. And that's really important because then that let's say you have a 50-year-old tree, that's 50 years worth of carbon dioxide that's not in the atmosphere, and it's in that tree. And so also as they grow, they are releasing up to 40% of that carbon back into the soil and feeding it to the beneficial fungi and bacteria. And the carbon is then stored in fungal hyphae for hundreds of years. And then it can also just naturally be stored in the soil. And so you might think, oh my God, if I cut down this tree, I'm releasing this carbon back into the soil or into the atmosphere. And yeah, that's kind of true, but you're not releasing all of it. When you mulch, when you, chipper a tree and you create a mulch and you mulch it back down into the soil, you're adding that carbon back in that soil into those little mulch chips. And so you're kind of contributing to this carbon cycle that is really important for mitigating climate change. And so I've talked about, why you should cultivate these systems, why they're so great. So now I'm going to talk about how to cultivate these systems on your own. And so don't worry about reading this whole slide. I'm going to read over it and I'm going to go over each thing because it's really important. And so because all these systems are different, it's really important to kind of assess what you want and what you are working with. And so I kind of broke it down into these 6 elements of kind of questions to ask yourself. And so starting with your goals, what do you want from this garden and what benefits are you aiming for? So, some people might be aiming for a business. Some people might be aiming for food. Some people just want fun. And those will be grown very differently. If I'm growing my forest garden to have fun and to, teach my family about gardening, I'm going to be managing and growing my forest garden much differently than someone who's doing it as a business. And so you want to kind of gauge why you're doing it. And of course, these goals will change as you go on, but continue to assess why you're doing it and what you want to get from it. And then also you have to assess your limitations. And so when you pick a site, you have to understand that you have a limited amount of space. And you might not, you might have a bunch of land, but if you do, there is like a carrying capacity. And so for homeowners, when you have to look at your land, you might have to think, okay, I have a limited amount of space. So what trees will be my canopy? And that's really important because when you're selecting plants, it's really easy to be like, oh, I want to grow these 55 species. But if those 55 species are all trees, it's not going to work. And so you have to assess what your limitations are with your space and how you're going to work with that. And then also, if you're living in a home and that's where you want to grow it, how long do you want to be there? Or are you going to be there in the next 10 years? And if so, what do you want your garden to look like in the next 10 years? And if not, then how are you going to work around that? Are you going to mainly work out of pots? Are you only going to grow some things? And so these are the questions you have to kind of gauge to make a good plan. And then also plant selection. So what do you want to grow to achieve your goals? It's really easy to get really excited about the plants that maybe you want to eat or you want to sell or things like that. But you really have to assess what you can actually grow and what can grow in your area. And Florida changes so much, even just when you're 20 minutes above somebody, So I put down here to look up hardiness zones. And if you've never heard of a hardiness zone, you can probably ask your local extension office, or you can go on the USDA like hardiness zone map and type in your zip code and figure out what your hardiness zone is. And hardiness zones are kind of the lowest temperatures that your area gets, and kind of like the lowest freezes that you'll get. And those are really important because some plants, the plants that can be grown in South Florida cannot be grown in North Florida the majority of the time. And so you have to gauge what can actually grow in your area. And sometimes, we can grow bananas here in Hernando County, but majority of the time they will not fruit unless you're in certain areas because the cold that we get will kill the flowers and then that kills the fruit. And so they might grow, but they might not fruit. Or if they do fruit, you have to they're going to need a lot more attention than others. You might have to individually cover every fruit. And so you have to assess, am I actually going to do that? Is it worth my time and energy and my money? And is it achievable? So plant selection is a big one. And it's good to have a plan for that to save you time, money, and energy and frustration. And so also going down to now soil assessment. So Florida soil is usually sand or clay. And those are not the best mediums to grow a forest garden. And so majority of the time you will have to mend your soil so that you can prepare for it to be a forest garden. And I'm not saying you have to put in a bunch of time and energy and money, but you have to build a good foundation for your forest garden to grow on. or you will be frustrated in the long run. And so the most important thing I can say for this is do a soil test. Test the nutrients that you have, test the pH of your soil, and use your local extension office to do that. They can tell you everything about your soil, and it's really important to kind of have that guiding data so that you know what you need to do and you're not going in blind. And then also assess your sunlight. So this is really important because if you want to grow a bunch of things that are full sun and you're putting it in areas that do not get full sun, then you will be wasting your money and you'll be very frustrated. So assess which areas of your site get full sun, full shade, or partial sun or shade. And that way you can plant plants in the right place. You put the right plant in the right place. And then now moving on to water flow assessment. So this is really important because in Florida, we get a lot of water sometimes, and we get, majority of the time we get a lot of water. And so you have to assess, all right, do some areas of my lawn get absolutely no water? And do some areas of my landscape get a bunch of water? Do areas of my landscape get flood? How does the water move through my landscape? And if so, you might plant a tree somewhere and that could interrupt the flow. And so gauging the water flow of your property or your site that you're going to be planting, and then also, where water pools and where it doesn't and things like that can really help you put plants that need to go in certain areas. And then you also might have to redirect the water of your property and things like that. So you want to get an accurate water flow assessment. And that's usually just by watching your landscape, what happens after it rains, what happens when it doesn't rain for a long time and things like that. So now I want to briefly touch on this. I just want to throw it in here because I feel like a lot of people could be starting from a lawn, and that's all right. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about a sheet mulching process and kind of how do you turn a patch of grass or weeds or whatever, things that you don't want growing, into a good foundation for your forest garden. And so this is actually what I did. Some of these pictures are from my actual site. And so sheet mulching is essentially you are layering like cardboard and mulch and compost and things like that, so you can create a good foundation. And so that stuff will decompose and create beautiful soil for your forest garden to grow on. And so I kind of have like the different steps of what you can do to turn, to go from lawn to lusciousness. And so you can mow the grass or the weeds or whatever's growing really, really short, way shorter, so that than they could to survive. Because the point is you want to suffocate these things. So you want to mow the stuff very, very short. And if it's grass clippings, you can just leave it right back onto the thing and that'll mulch down. If it's weeds, you might not want to do that because they sometimes are super resilient. They can come seed back up. So when you're sheet mulching, you usually use cardboard. If you are using cardboard, it's really important to take all of the staples and tape and all of that out from the cardboard, because that stuff doesn't biodegrade, and you don't want to be putting that into your soil or into the environment at all. So you want to take the extra step to do that. And then you're going to cover the area with a layer of cardboard. And you can also use any paper material. You can use newspaper. You can use, I've heard people use like construction paper, anything that will biodegrade that is, will kind of create that layer so things cannot grow through. So you'll put down the cardboard here and you'll create like a nice layer, even layer across. Then you'll water that because you want to kind of kickstart that decomposition process. Then you can add a layer of compost. You don't have to do this, but you can. And that kind of will immediately add nutrients to your soil. You can also use like gardening soil or anything, but you have to make sure you know what's in it and make sure that that's what you want to be putting into your area. So you can do the compost. That's optional. You do not have to do that to do the sheet mulching process successfully, but you can if you'd like. If you use compost. You want to use less mulch because you don't want the layers to be so thick that when you plant trees, you don't want all this stuff to be up against their trunk or things like that, because that can cause fungus and things like that that can hurt the plant. So you don't want these to be so thick that it could hurt these things, especially if you already have trees. Like you can see here, we already have a mulberry tree. So we didn't want to pile it so thick that it would hurt the mulberry tree. So if you added compost, add only 2 to 4 inches of mulch. But if you didn't add compost, then you can add 5 to inches of mulch. And then you can see in the last picture there, it's all mulched in, and then you want to water that to kind of kickstart that decomposition. If it's raining a lot, you don't have to water it. And then after that, I didn't include a picture, but you can. After that, if you don't want to plant immediately, I would suggest, or if you just want to kind of create good soil, I would suggest planting a cover crop. And what cover crops usually are is so you have something planted there that's intentional. It can be a nitrogen fixer, so you're already adding nitrogen to the soil. And usually it's so that weeds cannot grow. You know, when you have something already growing, the weeds cannot use that space because it's already filled. But if you use a cover crop that's a nitrogen fixer, then you can just cut that and mulch it right back down, and then you're ready to go. So that's kind of a transformation process from something you don't want growing there to preparing for a forest garden. So now I'm going to go over some tips. These are not in any specific order, but these are just some tips that I think as I've been growing my own forest garden, as I've worked with them, I think when considering growing a forest garden, these are some tips to follow. So one of the most important things is to refrain from using any chemicals or synthetic inputs unless absolutely necessary. By absolutely necessary, I mean recommended by a professional, and that is the last resort. The reason I say this is because it might be a short-term solution and it might work right then and there, but because you're cultivating an ecosystem, you don't want to be putting chemicals and things like that into your system. And then also synthetic inputs. What I mean by that is like fertilizers, you know, getting like a nitrogen fertilizer and things like that. Because as you're building your soil, you're encouraging beneficial fungi and bacteria to come into your soil. And what those will do is they will form relationships with the plant roots, and they will help get the plants the nutrients that they need. When you add nutrients, you know, whether they're usually synthetic inputs, it usually is not spread evenly over in the area. And even, you know, you can spread it evenly over the area, but the thing is that you're adding all of this, let's say nitrogen, and you're no longer creating that need for that plant to form those relationships with the fungi and the bacteria. And you want those relationships to form because that will help the long-term success of your system. You do not want your plants to be reliant on these external inputs. And so you have to think of, will this benefit me in the long term? You know, and you might have to, you know, there may come times where you have to use, you know, certain chemicals and things like that, but you want it to be your last resort because you don't want to damage things in the long term, and you don't want to hinder these ecological processes that will help you have a successful garden. Because in the long term, if you maintain these ecological processes, most likely you will have to put in less work later on. That's usually the goal. Okay, number 2, focus on the process as much as the outcome. It is a long-term system. And so it's really easy to get really discouraged because maybe you're starting your forest garden, but things are moving pretty slow. It's a long-term system. You know, your trees will grow over time. Things will come together, and it's really important to focus on the process as much as the outcome, because your garden will never truly be finished or done. There is no, you know, you might have an end goal, and that's perfect. But there will always be maintenance. There will always be new plants that might excite you that you want to grow in there. And so you want to enjoy that process. And so you'll encounter many mistakes. No matter the expertise level, you are literally working with nature. So anything can happen, and it's really important to enjoy that process. Okay, number 3, make observations of your local area as much as you can, the plants, the animals, even in your local community. And the reason I say this is because nature has got it down. It's not perfect, it's always adapting and changing, but Florida naturally wants to be a forested system. And if you left an area and, human intervention never came into it, it would eventually, over a very long period of time, turn into a forest. And you might even have forests around you in Florida. It's really important to see what's going on in there because you can learn and use that as inspiration for your garden. So the goal is kind of to work smarter and not harder. And the thing usually with forest gardens is that you put in a lot of work in the beginning, but over time, as things mature and you kind of have found a balance in your system, nature will do the work for you. And that's kind of the goal. So the more you understand about the natural processes and natural systems, the more you can incorporate that into your own system and kind of have nature do the work for you. Leave space for plants to mature. This is really, really important. It's easy to buy a bunch of plants and they're all really small. And you plant them all really close to each other. And then as they grow, you have a bunch of issues with overcrowding. Really important to think of the plant as already a mature plant when you're planting it. So if you are planting a tree and it's only 8 feet tall, maybe 2 feet wide, but the mature height is 30 feet tall and 30 feet wide, it's really important to think of that tree as you're planting it as 30 feet tall and 30 feet wide, because eventually it will be that size and you don't want to be frustrated and have to move things or have other things die because you didn't account for that mature size. Number 5, use your local extension office for help. The IFAS extension is there for you and it is a phenomenal resource, and everything that they put out is researched. It's, proven to work. And so you will save a lot of time, money, and energy by just going to your local extension office and asking what to do, what to grow, how to fix something. A lot of the agents there or almost, I think all of them are trained in integrative pest management. And that's essentially using several different techniques besides chemicals to combat an issue you may be having. And so it's really important to use them as a resource. Number 6, work with the plants you already have. Majority of the time, a space will not be completely cleared out. You'll have trees and plants that are already there. Learn about what they are, if they can benefit you in your system. And if they're really big, work with them. It takes a really long time to grow a canopy. And if you already have a giant oak tree, then work with it. Unless you're allergic and you really don't want it. But it's really important to use what you have. It'll save you a lot of money. Number 7, get creative with solutions. Sometimes one problem is a solution to another. And the reason I say this is because you don't have to have a lot of money and you don't have to do things a certain way for it to work. And so I gave an example here. Personally, I have a lot of water coming off of my house in a waterfall-like manner, and it floods, and it's not working for me right now. But I could use that water and reroute it into a rain barrel, and then later on during dry spells, I can use that to water my garden. Therefore, my one problem is a solution to another that I'm having. So just think creative, use your neighbors, your community, and things like that to really think about a problem, to solve it creatively. Number 8, be all right with change. Leave room for setbacks. They are normal and expected. The reason I say this is because, like I said earlier, you're co-managing with the laws of nature. They're not always expected. You can't plan for everything. You might not be expecting a hurricane to come and then it comes, or you have a population decline in a beneficial insect. Anything can happen, and it's expected that things will be unexpected. So it's okay to have setbacks. It's okay for things to not work. Even if you're an expert, things will go wrong. Number 9, plant your trees first. The reason I say that is because they take time to mature, and you want them to be growing and maturing while you are doing other things. And so if you plant those first, you plan out where you're going to have your canopy and your understory and stuff like that. plant those first, and then you can focus on your annuals and perennials and everything else, because you'll get stuff, you'll get food and everything and the benefits from your smaller species and things that yield very quickly. And you'll be doing that as those trees are maturing. And so don't wait to plant those, get them in there. And number 10, document your progress and your setbacks. So it's important to know when a plant was planted, when it was pruned, when it had sick or had problems, and when you fertilized it. Fertilize it doesn't mean you directly applied fertilizer. It could be, oh, I added compost to my system this time of year. And then also the setbacks are really important because you want to know what worked and what didn't. You know, when you tried solving an insect issue like this and it didn't work, you know, you want to be able to look back on that, because if you have that insect issue again, you want to, okay, I did all these things and it didn't work, but this one thing did work. So it's really important to do that. And then also take pictures. You want to document everything. Even building this presentation, I realized, oh, I didn't document a lot of things, and it would have been really helpful to show people. And then also you want to look back and see all of the progress you've made. So definitely take pictures. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad, just take pictures. And now I'm going to talk about resources really quickly. So I have a lot going on here, but these two at the top are YouTube channels. So Dr. Elaine Ingham, she is a phenomenal doctor of soil. And so she has a lot of videos of how the soil ecosystem works, how you can build, how you can create living soil, how plants and soil interact, and things like that. Jeff Lawton down here, he is based in Australia, and he is a big name in permaculture, and also he does a lot of stuff with forest gardens, and he is a great teacher on like ecological processes and working with nature and things like that. If you're building a community food forest or forest garden, this is a phenomenal book on how to actually work with other people and how do you, cultivate a beautiful garden with other people who might have different goals and things like that. Martin Crawford is based in the UK, and he actually has a nonprofit organization called the Agroforestry Research Trust, and he puts out phenomenal resources on creating forest gardens. So he does a lot of research. This is a broad book, but he also has specific books about like shrubs that grow in temperate climates and things like that. David the Good is based in Florida, and he has a lot of books on the Florida landscape. And so this book is phenomenal in creating your own Florida food forest. These two books, they are giant. They're basically textbooks. They're 2 volumes, and they're by Dave Jackie and Eric Tosenmeyer. If you are really into ecological theory or, design and things like that, these 2 are phenomenal books, and I highly recommend them. And then lastly, if you're wondering how you get mulch for free, because it can be very expensive, I'd recommend talking to your local not landscapers, like tree trimmers and things like that. And if they're trimming trees, you can ask them what trees they're trimming to kind of get an idea of what mulch you're getting. And then you can ask them to drop it. This pile of mulch is my own they were trimming trees in my area, and I said, hey, can you drop it? And they did. There's a website called Get Trip Drop, and you can sign up, and it basically do the same thing. It'll notify landscapers or tree trimmers in your area that you want mulch, and they'll drop it. The cons is that you do not get to pick what mulch you are getting, and it can be a mixture of trees. Sometimes you might get like invasive species or garbage. So, take it with a grain of salt, but it's free. So, and you get a lot of it. So yeah, those are some resources that I would recommend. And then now I'm good for questions. And if you liked this class, please let us know. I'd be happy to go in depth about anything I talked about here in another class, or, branch off and talk about things related to this if you're interested. And you can email this email right here to let us know, or you can comment on the Facebook page or anything like that.
Okay, Sydney, that was great.
Thanks.
You're hired. We're definitely going to have you come back again. So And we got a lot of comments here. We got a couple of questions. Um, Obviously, a lot of people were very excited for this, and you had some people who obviously know you tuning in also, which is great. Um, we got Benjamin from Gainesville. So you have to remember that when we give a class like this, we probably have people from all over the state of Florida tuning in. So if you start asking questions about, will this grow in my yard or will that grow in my yard, you need to let us know where you're at also. Because
Yeah.
Gainesville is very, very different from Miami, that's for sure.
Yeah.
First question here is Noel was taking notes, but will the slideshow be available after the talk? Thank you.
Yes, it will. The video will be uploaded automatically to YouTube, right? And also it'll be available on Facebook.
Yes, the entire presentation, as soon as we're done, a few minutes after we're done, is going to be available on Facebook. So you could watch the entire presentation if you're watching it through Facebook. It is saved on YouTube as a video, but it takes a few hours for that to happen. So you probably wouldn't be able to rewatch it until tomorrow morning. If somebody just wanted the PowerPoint, can they email you? Could you email them a copy
Oh
of the
yeah,
PowerPoint?
definitely.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and show the email address again before the very end. So go ahead and email Sydney and she'll get a copy of the PowerPoint to you. I know it's a lot easier than taking a whole lot of notes. So a couple people wanted that. So we got a question. We got a couple questions from Benjamin. The first one is, what would you say are the initial steps in starting a food forest in a busy or overgrown area rather than starting with a nice, empty, blank slate?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So it depends on what is already there. If it's stuff that you want, then that's great. Work with it, plan with it. But if it's stuff that you don't want, then obviously you want to get rid of that and do the process of that. I would say if you're already growing a garden, chances are you already had pretty good soil because you're already mending it. So you could still do a soil test to check if it's good to grow a garden, and just kind of use what you already had there. And so if you already had a few trees and you already have your canopy, then you don't have to worry about that. And you can worry about the understory and stuff. And same if you had the other layers or things like that. But I would say you can use the sheet mulching technique or anything like that in smaller areas. You know, if you just have this one clump of weeds and you want to get rid of it, you can put down the cardboard and the mulch and then clear that space for new growth.
Okay, and he had kind of a follow-up question. Any rule of thumb for how many large canopy plants or trees per given area?
It depends on how big your site is. So, you know, like for my backyard, I could probably only get a handful of trees in there before I would really start overcrowding. But if you have a larger area, just make sure you plant them far enough away from each other, because unless you're going to prune very specifically and make it so that they can fit, uh, leave space for them to grow. Take note of their mature heights and sizes, and then you can have at it as long as they're not growing into each other and they have enough room to grow. Then you're good to grow as many as you want.
And something else that's helpful with trees, I know University of Florida has fact sheets online on pretty much every tree that you can grow in Florida. So look that up. Let's say if you're interested, how big does a live oak tree get to be? If you just Google University of Florida live oak, they have a fact sheet on that, and it will tell you the mature height and spread. Because you always need to remember how big it's going to eventually get, and not just how big it is today.
Yes.
You can get a little tiny 3 foot tall loquat, and it's going to grow pretty quickly, and it's going to get 15, maybe even 20 feet tall, and that wide also. So you need to take into account the mature height and width.
Mm-hmm. And you can also train trees to grow smaller, but you have to take note of that.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
So Carol asked, I planted a yam plant in May. How do I know when it is ready to harvest? Yams should definitely be ready to harvest by now, or probably already were ready to harvest. And once again, that depends on exactly where you live. I'm just assuming for Hernando County or Central Florida, you could have harvested them back around anytime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So if the foliage has died back, it's definitely ready to go now. And here's one for you. Any value in using mounds in your forest garden in flat Florida, or is that just wasted energy?
There's definitely value in using mounds, but make sure that you're using mounds in a way that will actually help you. So actually, in my research for the New College of Florida Forest Garden, they created berms and mounds, but they did it in a way so that all of the water was flowing away from the trees that they planted there, which was not helpful. But you can use mounds, like if you don't like the sheet mulching is almost like a mini part of that. You can like layer a mound so that you have a lot of nutrients and you don't have to wait for the soil to be ready to grow in. Or you can use mounds for things that might not need a lot of water, and you can plant those at the bottom or at the top, and then things that need a lot of water, you can plant them at the bottom. So just use them intentionally and understand what's the worst thing that could happen with my mound, and then what's the best thing, and kind of plan for that.
And that depends to a certain extent where you live and what kind of soil you have also.
Yeah.
I know in South Florida, they grow all the different fruit trees, avocados and lychees and mangoes on raised berms. But
Mm-hmm.
that's because if they get flood waters down there, it keeps the trees and the tree roots above the water. Because avocados and mangoes, if they sit in standing water for 2 or 3 days, they're dead. It'll kill them. So that situation is going to be a little bit different than normally here in Central Florida. You don't see a whole lot of berms.
No. Yeah, like I said,
it's sandy enough soil that we have, generally pretty good drainage.
yeah, that happened at New College. We're in Central Florida, and it didn't work out the way it was intended.
Okay, Claudia asks, she's within 2 blocks of the beach and bordering one of our mosquito canals here in Flagler County. So see, we have people from all over the state tuning in. That's great. Tree canopy here normally means native palms and live oaks. I have a yard that is a blank slate, but that is mostly lawn. I want to include palms and oaks, but also southern red cedars and hollies. Thoughts on what strategy? Add in wax myrtle and some papayas. And what about olive trees or figs? A lot of questions there.
Yeah. So I personally don't know if all those grow in Flagler County, but like I said, like I emphasized in the presentation, since you're starting with a blank slate and I'm guessing you wouldn't already have that canopy, you would want to plant those as soon as you can. You can even do that before you do the sheet mulching technique, or you can wait until after, things like that. But you want to get those planted as soon as possible because you want them to grow and form your canopy. So I don't know if you can speak on if those can grow in Flagler County, but
sure. Live oaks do very well in Flagler County, and they do get very large. They'll give you a lot of shade, and they'll give you a lot of cold protection because they tend to keep everything growing underneath them a little bit warmer in the winter. We do have native palm trees. Cabbage palms are native palm trees. Southern red cedars are a very good native shrub, and they're very, very hardy. And it's really about the only evergreen that's going to do really well in Central Florida because it is native. We do have native hollies. Wax myrtles are native. Papayas could do very, very well. Bananas could do well. If you're interested in olive trees, University of Florida, just the last few years, because they become more popular, has done a lot of research on them, and they have a lot of information because around the world, there are literally hundreds of varieties of olives. Some of them do very well here. Other ones don't do well here at all. And they've done all the research and all the field trials to get an idea of which ones are going to perform best. So try looking online under University of Florida olive trees, and you'll find a lot of good information. And figs can do well here in Florida. There's a couple different varieties. Once again, University of Florida has fact sheets on figs also.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really good resource, a good place to start.
I wanted to add really quick also that trees mature and grow at different rates. And so when you are looking at growing different trees and what to plant first, I would look at growth rates or ask your local extension office on, or if you can find those resources. How long does it take for this to actually get to the mature height? And do I have that kind of time?
Yeah, and people will ask for fast growing trees. Fast growing tree, that's a relative term. So.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good technical question for you. Debbie started a garden once with this process with the mulch and the cardboard. How to deal with termite larvae that come to the surface under the cardboard. Will they be harmful? I became fearful to go further past the mulch layer after I saw the bugs.
Do you want to talk on that one? I don't know much about, I know the mulching process can attract bugs, but I think it depends on the mulch that you use and how you use it. I know some people do it. They will leave space in between their house and the mulching process. So at least the mulch isn't right up against their house. But I personally don't know much about termites.
Sure. Well, you have to remember that termites and roaches and all those different insects are all a part of the natural environment outdoors. So we all have termites in our neighborhood. We all have roaches outside in our backyard. It's already dark outside, so they're already out. So they're there. Generally, putting together a layered garden like this, if you do get termites in it, they are just looking for the dead wood, the wood chip mulch to break down, and they're really not going to be a huge problem. You don't want to be piling a lot of wood or wood chips up against your house because that's going to attract them to get a little bit too close to your house. You want to have some kind of regular termite inspections done by a professional because they can walk around the outside of your house and know what to look for. But I have to tell people a lot of times you can't go outside and sanitize the great outdoors. You can't go out there and get rid of every termite on your piece of property and bug and this and that and all the things you don't like, and try to keep all the things that you do like butterflies and birds and this and that, because they all depend on each other. And it's all one great big system. And you have to tolerate maybe some of the icky insects. I know a lot of people don't like insects quite as much as I do. So they're a little hesitant to be picking up, live roaches or termites or this and that. But generally, termites in a garden are really not a big problem. You don't want to attract them, but if you do get them, it's not a huge something to really panic about because they are a natural part of the environment.
Yeah, just because you see them doesn't mean they're a problem. Yeah.
Exactly, and we could all go for a walk in the woods right now, and we could find termites, and they break down wood. They break down the fallen dead trees. They break down the pine trees. It's a very important part of the entire cycle. So if you have some in your food forest, it's almost a sign that you're doing something right. If you start putting things together and you go out there and it's just barren and you can't find anything living out there, you probably made a mistake somewhere along the way. So we got a question from Shifra, is there any way to catch the beginning? Yes, there is. Like I said, this is you're watching us on Facebook. So this is going to be saved as a video on our Facebook page and also on the Facebook group. So as soon as we're all done, in a few minutes, it'll show back up and you can go ahead and click on it and watch it all the way from the beginning. And Lisa thinks it's great, and I think it is too. So thank you, Lisa. Here's one for you. Do you have any recommendations on highly productive native support plants for green manure, nitrogen fixation, etc.? I see a lot of recommendations for Flipsy Category 1 or Category 2 plants, which are invasives, or plants with a high invasion risk like guinea grass, tithonia, this and that. Obviously, we always encourage people to stay away from anything invasive. And you can contact your local extension office and they can let you know what is invasive and what is not. But can you recommend anything?
I would say that. Oh, okay. I would say that I'm trying to think of. So when I used my when I did a cover crop in my own garden, I used a crop called sun hemp, and that's a cover crop, and that grows really well in the summer. And so, sometimes when we have really, really hot summers, depending on where you are in Florida, you can grow sun hemp and it'll grow really, really big and it'll add a bunch of nitrogen to your soil. And then you can just mulch it right back down. And that is a really good cover crop to add nitrogen to your soil. And I'd always recommend that one. There's like legumes, but a lot of the times you are growing those because you want to eat those or use those. Trying to think of any off the top of my head. I would say that sun hemp is probably my go-to personally, and that's what I've seen used a lot. Can you think of any others that are good?
Sun hemp is not a Florida native. It is a tropical plant. So it loves it when it gets really hot and steamy during the summer. And if you get a good crop of it, it will get 10 feet tall.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you'll have to take a machete or something to it.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And it will give you a huge amount of organic matter. There are other things you can grow, different types of clover in the winter. One that I've used in vegetable gardens in the summer is sorghum Sudan grass.
Oh, yeah.
Which is another non-native, but it's not invasive. So there's a lot of choices out there for cover crops. Not a whole lot of native Florida plants I can think of, though.
Not native. Oh,
Mexican sunflower. Crop.
Mexican sunflower. I've read that in some areas, in Mexico, if you soak the leaves and then you kind of like make like a pulp, it almost makes like a liquid nitrogen fertilizer. I've never personally tried it, but I read about the process and it didn't seem too bad. So that's also another one, like using the leaves of a plant.
Okay, we got a little more encouragement here. And great information. I thoroughly agree. And a question about, can eucalyptus grow good in Florida? Did you have eucalyptus trees down in Sarasota area?
No, we didn't.
That they're mostly southern Florida. They're not native. They may be invasive. You'd have to double check on that one.
Yeah, I looked at FGCU's food forest, and that's southern, and they didn't have any growing there. They had most of the tropical species that can grow. So I don't know.
Okay, real quickly, we got great information, and thank you so much. And Brenda, one of the master gardeners, says, awesome job. And here's another question. Can you comment on how canopies moderate temperature extremes for lower layer plants?
Yeah, that's a really good statement, I guess, or, question. So yeah, if you've ever walked into a forested area, you know that as soon as you walk into that area, there's a temperature change, especially on a really hot day or anything like that. And so the canopy does create a microclimate. And like Bill said earlier, some can kind of act as that moderator so that the lower layers don't have endure like that crazy heat that might get, or a crazy freeze or anything like that. I'm trying to think of certain examples, but I would say that canopies regulate temperature a lot because you're kind of creating this, like, I almost think of it as it can almost be like a dome, and you have like your canopy and So you have like the sun maybe that's beating down on those upper trees, but then it breaks up and then it's only reaching certain levels of the space. And so that is moderating temperature. And then you also have wind that can come and you can have wind breaks. These trees act as wind breaks and they kind of are like the protector of the system. And so they kind of endure everything and protect the other layers from having to endure any extremes.
And I know from a little bit more of a residential homeowner perspective, large trees do help to hold in the warmth on a really cold winter night. So you'll see in a lot of people's yards, they'll have a lot of damage, frost damage to plants and grass outside of where the tree canopy is, but right underneath the tree, it stayed warm enough where it kept them from freezing. And people, the original residents of Florida, when they built houses, they had a whole system for what side of the house you would put trees on to shade the house during the summer. You put deciduous trees on, I guess, the southern side. So during the summer, the leaves help to create shade, keep the house cooler, but the leaves would fall off. So in the winter, more sun will come through and warm up the wall of the house to help keep you a little bit warmer in the winter. So yeah, trees do play a really, really important part on moderating the temperatures underneath them.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I didn't know about the homeowner like deciduous tree thing. That's cool.
Oh yeah, that was pre-air conditioning back when you had to depend on porches and properly placed trees to make it tolerable. And it works really well. I think we've gotten away from that because now we just, clear cut bulldoze an area, plop in a subdivision, put the houses in, replace the trees, the large oaks with the 6 foot tall live oak that's going to take, 50 years to get big enough where it's giving you shade at that point.
Yeah.
So Susan wants to know, how do you deal with Mexican petunia in your cypress grove? Mexican petunia is a nasty invasive, and you're going to have to dig it out. Dig it out, use herbicides, keep after it. Patience is your friend. So if you're diligent and you keep after it, you can get rid of it. So let's see, we got a couple other. Do you have a favorite variety of bananas for Florida?
Oh, I would say I don't know if there's a variety name, but like ice cream bananas. They're really small and they're really, really like silky, and they basically are just candy. Yeah, most banana cultivars are delicious because they grow, a lot of times they grow smaller bananas that are much different than the ones you see in the store. Almost every single banana that I've had that, from a friend that's grown them or whatever, no matter the variety, it's much better than anything I've ever had in the store.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm not really an expert on banana varieties, but we do have a master gardener who grows them, and she has a whole bunch of different varieties. She has a lot going on in her yard. So I'm definitely going to get a hold of her to do one of these evening classes to talk about what she has growing, because it's not exactly a food forest, but very, very close to it. It's a very, very heavily edible landscape. So hold that question and tune back in and be sure to catch. We'll definitely do something on bananas. Can you think of any good ground covers for Zone 9B, which is generally our zone, or a little bit further south?
I really love perennial peanut. There's, I don't know if it grows well here, but creeping thyme. It's like, it's a type of thyme that creeps and you can walk on it and it smells really awesome. Does sunshine mimosa, can that grow well here?
Yes,
Okay,
it does.
really well in Sarasota.
Very well. Very pretty too.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorites. That grew really well all over New College, and it's beautiful when it blooms.
Yeah, perennial peanut does do really well. They're using that a lot of times in the middle of roads
Mm-hmm.
or a grass layer in the median.
Yeah, the beautiful little yellow flowers.
Yeah, stuff grows like a weed, doesn't really need irrigation,
Yeah.
does fix nitrogen. You can mow it if it's become a little bit higher than what you want. You can mow it, and it tolerates that. So let's go ahead and work towards kind of wrapping it up here. Um, Here's one. Kimberly wants to know, will she ever get fruit on an apricot in Brooksville, Florida? That's a tough one. Not familiar with any apricot varieties that do well here. We do have peaches, plums, and nectarines, generally varieties that are bred by University of Florida. Very important that if you're thinking about putting in some type of fruit tree, apricots, peaches, plums, nectarines, that you get the right variety depending on where you live, because what you're looking at is chill hours, because those trees need a certain amount of cold temperature in the winter. So in the spring, they're going to bloom and they're going to get leaves. So there are varieties of peaches that grow great in Ohio, and they need 2,000 chill hours a year. Here in Hernando County, we get about 350 chill hours a year here. So your Ohio peach tree might grow here and it might look very pretty, but you will never get any flowers or peaches on it. So really important that you line up the proper variety of tree with the proper number of chill hours that you get on average, and it varies a lot everywhere. Teresa was on here this evening and she said, great presentation, Sydney. So
Thank you, Teresa.
we appreciate Teresa helping out with these things. Are you familiar with honey mesquite?
No, I don't. No, I'm not.
I'm not too familiar with that either. But let me go ahead and start.
I'll happily answer that when I'm back in the office.
Let me go ahead and start sharing this. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact our office. There is our phone number. And if you'd like to email me, there is my email. Definitely the best way to get in touch with me is through email. Phones don't work really well with me because I'm here and there and everywhere all day long, it seems like. And if you want to email Sydney, if you just go ahead and email her at the office at hernandomg@ifas.ufl.edu. And if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm sure that you can save it as a PDF and email it to people if they ask for it.
Oh yeah, definitely. That'll be super easy to do. I'd be happy. I want people to get info.
And if you ever want to know what kind of classes we have coming up, like when we schedule a banana one, or when we're going to have Sydney back on again, and we will have her back on, don't worry about it. We have a freestanding webpage. If you go to www.hernandoextension.com, that has a full listing of all of our classes that we have scheduled. We do them during the day, in the evening. We do them on Zoom and Facebook Live and YouTube. All the information and links that you need to know are going to be right there. If you have to register in advance, it tells you that. It has all the links that you need. And once again, if you get confused or you need even more information, if you call our office, just give us a call. We're there 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, except for holidays. And you'll probably get Teresa at that phone number, and she's more than happy to help you out. And one more person asked about the website to get those wood chips, and that is www.getchipdrop, and that's a hard one to say, .com. And we've got a couple other comments on here. Okay, another bug lover like myself. People don't realize that insects are crucial for birds, especially in the spring when they're hatching their eggs. They eat a huge number of insects and they depend on them. So any advice on where you can get seeds for sun hemp?
I've used Southern Exposure Seed Exchange before. I've just online. I usually try to find heirloom seeds, but I personally have bought them from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange.
And your shirt got noticed, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted people to see it. Yeah.
And true, sun hemp can get very tall. If you plant it early, take good care of it, it can get 10 feet tall, and it gives you a huge amount of biomass. And it
Yeah,
does have a big root system.
it
So
does.
you need to be prepared and be in good shape and have the pickaxe and the right tools to chop it down, chop it up, turn it under, and kind of get it recycled.
Yeah, if you have a small wood chipper, you can always just throw
Yeah,
it
yeah,
that.
that helps. And here, Teresa has a link to a University of Florida publication. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I think that's about it. I think that's most all the questions we have here. Like I said, we'll go back through once this show's back up on Facebook and go ahead and answer any more questions that pop up. And Sydney will go back on there and share some links and everything else with you. But I think this worked out really well. This is really great. Thank you so much, Sydney, for coming on here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
It was, yeah, yeah. And if we keep having this many people tuning in, we'll definitely come back on here and keep doing this.
I love
Um,
that.
if anybody ever has any suggestions, topics that you'd like to see us cover, go ahead and share that in the comments on Facebook or email us directly. And because we have almost 100 master gardeners here in Hernando County, and they are a wealth of information for anybody who's seen Gary. The Gary Gethin Orchid Show that he comes in the office and does on Facebook Live. He's an orchid expert. We have people that are experts on native plants. Sydney, knows a lot more about food forests than I do. So go ahead and just keep sharing your requests, and we'll keep trying to find an appropriate speaker to do something on. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this evening. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again really soon.